France. September 19th, 1944. The plateau above Arracourt, before dawn. The fog is thick enough to chew. Sergeant Donald Critchfield of the 37th Tank Battalion grips the cold steel lip of his hatch and stares into absolute gray. Somewhere behind him, 24 Sherman tanks idle in the dark, their engines making a sound he has learned to sleep through. A low, mechanical breathing, almost domestic, almost safe. Then he hears something else. A different engine. Heavier, lower. A sound that doesn't come from anything American. Critchfield has been in this war long enough to know a Panther engine when it rolls through fog at him. He counts by sound alone. 2, 4, 6, more. Panzer Brigade 111 is out there in that gray wall. 2 full battalions of brand-new Panther tanks rushed from German factories to stop Patton's Third Army before it reaches the Rhine. Each Panther weighs 45 tons. Its long 75mm gun can punch through a Sherman's front plate at over 1,000 meters. Its armor, angled sharply at 60 degrees, turns most American shells into sparks. German tankers have a word for the Sherman. They call it the Tommy Cooker, the Ronson, because it lights on first strike. Critchfield's Sherman weighs 33 tons. His gun, firing at close range, might scratch a Panther's side armor if the angle is right and God is paying attention. He knows this. Every tanker in the Third Army knows this. It is the kind of knowledge that sits in your chest at 0 dark 30 and makes it hard to breathe. He pulls off his leather glove, reaches for his radio handset. The bakelite is cold, familiar. The most important piece of equipment in this 33-ton machine. He keys the transmit button. All stations, Baker 6, contact, bearing 270, armor, wait out. 15 words. In the next 90 seconds, what those 15 words set in motion will destroy 63 German tanks, kill or capture hundreds of German tankers, and shatter one of the last great armored offensives Germany launches in the West. Not because Critchfield's Sherman is a better tank. Because it is part of something the Panzer had no answer for. This is not a story about machines. It is a story about what happens when a nation stops trying to outgun its enemy and starts outthinking them instead. Every book written about World War II armored warfare eventually arrives at the same conclusion. The Sherman tank was inferior to its German opponents. The Tiger I, the Panther, the Panzer IV with its long-barreled gun. On a direct comparison of armor thickness and firepower, this conclusion is historically accurate. It has always been accurate. It has always been accurate. It has always missed the point. This is not a story about who built the better tank. This is the story of how America deliberately, systematically, and sometimes painfully built an entire method of armored warfare, a doctrine, a communication architecture, a logistics machine, a culture of institutional learning that made the individual tank comparison irrelevant. Most histories skip this story because it lacks the drama of a duel between steel giants. But it is the reason the Allies won in the West. It is the reason German Panzer aces with hundreds of kills eventually ran out of room to retreat. What America built wasn't a better weapon. It was a better system. And systems, in the end, always devour weapons. To understand how far America came, you have to stand at the bottom of the hole they started in. Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. February 19, 1943. The air smells of cordite and burning rubber and something else, the particular sweet-sick smell of a vehicle fire when the crew is still inside. The 1st Armored Division, America's supposed cutting edge in North Africa, is coming apart in real time. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, the man who had driven the British back across Libya twice, has turned his Africa corpse on the green Americans like a hammer on a nail, and the nail is bending. At the Kasserine Pass, in the brown hills of central Tunisia, American M3 Grant and Sherman tanks are burning in the afternoon light. Whole battalions are pulling back. Some are not pulling back. They are running. In 3 days of fighting, the 1st Armored Division loses nearly 200 tanks, over 200 vehicles, and more than 6,000 men killed, wounded, or captured. The 168th Infantry Regiment is functionally destroyed as a combat unit. American forces retreat more than 50 miles before the line stabilizes, but the real damage is not to equipment. The real damage is what the reports back to Washington reveal. Lieutenant James Burt, a young armor officer who survives the engagement, writes in his diary, "We had the maps. We had the tanks. We had the orders. We had the maps. We had the ints. We had the orders. We had no idea what we were doing." It is a brutal self-assessment. It is also honest. American armor doctrine in early 1943 is borrowed from pre-war theory, barely tested under realistic conditions, and almost entirely unsuited to fighting a German army that has been refining armored warfare in live combat since Poland in 1939. The failure at Kasserine is not a failure at Kasserine is not a failure of courage. The men who hold their positions at places like Jebel Lasouda and Zbyatla die bravely. They hold far longer than tactical logic demands. The failure is systemic. Tanks operate without proper infantry escort. Artillery is positioned too far from the front to respond quickly. In some sectors, unit commanders communicate by runner, a method not much improved since the First World War. When German forces probe for weak points, the American response is slow. Isolated. Predictable. General Fritz Bayerlein, Rommel's chief of staff, notes in his after-action analysis that American equipment is not the problem. He writes, with clinical, almost reluctant precision, that American artillery, infantry, and armor operate as if belonging to 3 separate armies that happen to share a map. Their coordination is nearly non-existent. Their radio discipline is poor. They fight brave but disconnected. He is right, and his report lands on desks in Berlin as confirmation of something the Wehrmacht already believes. America can build machines, but it cannot build an army. Back in Washington, the Kasserine reports hit General Leslie McNair's desk like artillery rounds. At Fort Knox, instructors stop mid-lesson to absorb the news. In tank yards from Texas to Ohio, mechanics service Shermans scheduled to ship overseas, Shermans that will go to a war the doctrine doesn't yet know how to fight. Sergeant Horace Henderson, an instructor at the Armored Force School who had personally trained many of the men now retreating through Tunisia, sits down on a tank track when he hears the news. He is 24 years old. He sent these men across an ocean. He writes to his mother that evening, "I hope the lessons I gave them were the right ones, Mama. Right now I am not sure they were." If nothing changed, if the United States kept sending brave men into battle without a working system behind them, German experience would eventually overwhelm American numbers. Kasserine isn't the end of the American story in World War II, but it is the moment the real story begins. His name does not appear in many popular histories of the war. He never gave a famous speech. He never appeared in a newsreel. He did not survive to see the victory in Europe. Killed in France by American bombs during Operation Cobra, standing too close to a front line he insisted on observing personally, which tells you almost everything you need to know about the man. His name was General Leslie J. McNair. In the spring of 1943, McNair is 60 years old, thin-necked, quietly intense, the kind of officer who reads an after-action report the way a surgeon reads an X-ray, searching for the exact location of the break. As commanding general of Army Ground Forces, he controls how every American soldier is trained before they ship overseas. When the Kasserine reports arrive, he doesn't send a memo. He goes to Tunisia himself. What he finds confirms everything the paperwork said, and then some. American armor is fighting in isolation. Tanks charging German positions without infantry support. Artillery too far back to be useful. Radio communication between unit types inconsistent or absent entirely. The German combined arms system, in which tanks, motorized infantry, anti-tank guns, and artillery function as a single coordinated organism, is invisible to American doctrine because American doctrine has barely given the concept a serious name. McNair goes back to Washington and begins rewriting the book, not metaphorically. The Army field manuals, the actual training documents, are revised. The Armored Force School curriculum is restructured. Exercises are redesigned to force tank commanders and infantry commanders to share radios, share maps, share ground, solve problems together in real time rather than in sequence. The tank destroyer doctrine, which has been separating anti-tank assets from armored units in a way that weakens both, is reconsidered and rebuilt. What makes McNair exceptional is not his intellect. What makes him exceptional is this, he writes, in a formal letter to Secretary of War Henry Stimson, that American armored doctrine before Kasserine was wrong, that he had approved training programs that failed men in combat, that the system had to change, and that he takes responsibility for why it hadn't changed sooner. In any army, in any era, that kind of institutional honesty, the willingness to say in writing that you were raw, and here is what we're fixing, is rarer than good equipment. German intelligence notes the shift. A captured Wehrmacht analysis document from late 1943 warns that American ground forces are developing a capacity for combined arms coordination that was not evident in Tunisia. They are learning with unexpected speed. This development warrants serious attention. The Germans are watching, and what they're watching is an army rebuilding itself from the inside out, in the middle of a war, at a pace the Panzer divisions never anticipated. The transformation of American armor between 1944 rests on four interlocking pillars. Individually, none of them are revolutionary. Together they create something German Panzer aces encounter and cannot solve. The first pillar is radio architecture, every Sherman tank in a solve. The first pillar is radio architecture. Every Sherman tank in a U.S. Armored Division carries an SCR-58 radio system, a VHF transceiver linking individual tanks to platoon leaders to company commanders, and company commanders to battalion targets. More importantly, beginning in earnest after Kasserine, American doctrine mandates that forward artillery observers ride with lead tank elements, carrying their own radio sets, capable of calling a fire mission in under 3 minutes from first contact. The German Tiger may have a gun that kills a Sherman at 1,500 meters from first contact. The German Tiger may have a gun that kills a Sherman at 1,500 meters. But if that Sherman has a radio in the loader's hands and a forward observer in the turret ring, German armor will be receiving 105mm artillery shells before the Tiger's crew has finished celebrating their kill. This is not technology Germany lacked. German tanks carried radios too. What Germany lacked was the doctrine that made radios matter, the insistence baked into every training exercise that tanks and artillery and infantry must communicate in real time. Germany built its radio architecture around the individual genius of experienced commanders. America built its around the assumption that commanders would sometimes be wrong, wounded, or dead, and the system had to function anyway. The second pillar is combined arms integration, the doctrine that a tank is only one component of a weapons system. After Kasserine, American armored doctrine mandates that armor operations be conducted with organic infantry support. Not infantry, somewhere in the division. Infantry assigned to specific tank companies, trained with those companies, and fighting beside them in every engagement. The infantry clears anti-tank ambushes and hedgerow positions that would kill armor advancing alone. The armor provides fire support for infantry crossing open ground. Each arm is stronger in the presence of the other in a way that makes their combined capability greater than the sum of their parts. Rommel had built this system years earlier and used it to destroy American units at Kasserine, partly because they had it and the Americans didn't. By mid-1944, the Americans had absorbed the lesson and institutionalized it at the organizational level. The U.S. Armored Division structure of 1944, 3 tank battalions, 3 Armored Division structure of 1944, 3 tank battalions, 3 armored infantry battalions, with supporting engineer and reconnaissance elements, is built explicitly for this integration. Every unit has a counterpart. Every arm has a partner. It is combined arms doctrine, embedded in the table of organization itself. The third pillar is institutional learning, the formal system by which battlefield experience in one theater improves performance in another. This is the least visible pillar and, arguably, the most important. The Army's after-action report system, significantly expanded and formalized after 1942, means that every significant engagement, every tactic that worked, every tactic that failed, every piece of equipment that performed or disappointed, is analyzed, written up, and distributed to training schools and active field units within weeks of the event. After Kasserine, Fort Knox receives updated training directives within 60 days. After American tankers discover in Normandy that hedgerow terrain makes their tactics obsolete, Sergeant Curtis Coulin's improvised hedge cutter attachment, the Rhino device, welded from German beach obstacles, is approved, mass-produced, and fitted to hundreds of Shermans within 2 weeks of being reported up the chain. When crews report that ammunition stored in the hull creates catastrophic secondary explosions when hit, the brewing up that kills tankers faster than the initial round. Army Ordnance engineers modify ammunition storage into wet stowage systems, surrounding shells with water-filled jackets that dramatically reduce fire risk. The modification rolls out to frontline units within months. German tank crews are often more experienced, individually, than their American counterparts. But the American system learns faster than any individual crew can. The fourth pillar is logistics. And this is where the argument for system over hardware becomes impossible to contest. Between 1942 and 1945, American factories produce approximately 49,234 Sherman tanks. Germany produces roughly 1,347 Tiger I tanks and around 6,000 Panthers over the entire war. But the production gap alone doesn't tell the story. What matters is maintenance, the ability tanks operate in the field. American armored divisions carry dedicated maintenance battalions. They deploy spare parts depots within 30 miles of the front. They field M32 tank recovery vehicles designed specifically to pull damaged Shermans from the battlefield and return them to combat within 24 hours. The Tiger I is a magnificent machine. It requires over 300 man-hours to assemble. Its running gear, an interleaved overlapping road wheel system, is so mechanically complex that combat breakdowns are routine, and mud or ice can freeze the entire suspension solid overnight. When a Tiger breaks down in combat, it often cannot be recovered because Germany simply doesn't have enough heavy recovery vehicles. When it burns, the production pipeline is too thin, the factories too distant, and the war economy too strained to replace it quickly. The Sherman breaks down too, but when it does, it's recovered, repaired, and fighting again within a day. In sustained armored operations, that maintenance cycle matters as much as armor thickness, sometimes more. The women on the production lines of Detroit, Lima, and Pittsburgh built this maintenance machine. They worked 24-hour shifts in plants that ran through winter and summer without pause. Many of them had Gold Star flags in their windows at home, flags that meant a husband or brother was already gone. They built the replacement tanks. They built the spare parts. They built the recovery vehicles. They built the recovery vehicles. They built the fourth pillar, one weld at a time. But understanding these pillars means nothing without watching them tested against the finest armored force Germany could field. And tested they were, in fog and in the most desperate armored engagements the Western Front produced. Cateau, Kasserine Pass, Tunisia, February 22, 1943. The lesson begins. 3 days after the initial German breakthrough, American forces are still reeling, but something has changed. General Ernest Harmon, a blunt, thick-necked cavalryman who had spent his career studying armored warfare, arrives at II Corps headquarters. He finds an army in shock. He imposes order with the blunt instrument of his personality and one radical, simple demand: tanks and artillery must talk to each other in real time. Now, in the final 2 days of the Kasserine fighting, Sherman coordinates what becomes the first effective combined arms counterattack the Americans mount in the North African theater. Forward artillery observers accompany the lead tank battalions. When German armor pushes through the pass expecting to find the same disconnected American response it has exploited for 3 days, Sherman tanks hold position, absorbing contact, reporting location, buying time, long enough for American artillery to range in and begin work. The Germans advance into fire from a source they cannot see and cannot easily reach. The counterattack does not recapture everything lost. By the raw numbers, roughly 6,000 American casualties against approximately 2,000 German. Kasserine is a German victory. But in the last 2 days, something shifts. Commanders who survive carry what they learn forward with them. They carry it across the Mediterranean. They carry it to England and then to France. The system has taken its first bloody lesson. It will not forget. Arracourt, France. September 18th, 29th, 1944. The system fights back. By September 1944, Patton's Third Army has outrun its fuel. The great armored advance across France has slowed, not because of German resistance, but because the supply line stretched from Normandy cannot sustain the pace. Germany recognizes the window. Hitler personally orders Panzer Brigades 111 and 112 forward, over 100 Panthers and Panzer Force fresh from the factories, to strike Patton's exposed flank near the small Lorraine town of Arracourt. The 4th Armored Division, spearheaded by the 37th Tank Battalion under Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, 29 years old, stocky, with a cigar seemingly surgically attached to the corner of his mouth, receives the attack in morning fog on September 18th. Abrams does not fight the way the Germans expect. His Shermans do not advance to meet the Panthers at long range, where their gun disadvantage becomes decisive. Instead, they use the rolling terrain of the Lorraine Plateau. Hold down positions behind ridge lines, exposing only turrets. The 4 pillars activate in sequence. Forward artillery observers embedded with the tank companies have direct radio links to the 66th Armored Field Artillery Battalion, set up behind the ridges and ranging within minutes of the first contact report. Tank infantry teams seal the flanks, preventing Panthers from breaking through to the softer support elements behind. American P-47 Thunderbolts, alerted by forward air controllers via radio, begin arriving over the battlefield with teeth. The fog the Germans count on to mask their approach works against them. Panther commanders, trained to engage at long range with their superior optics, find themselves in close-range engagements, where the Sherman's disadvantages in armor matter less, and the radio network matters more. The Panthers fight better tanks than Shermans one-on-one. They do not fight better than Shermans plus artillery plus air support plus tank infantry coordination plus a logistics train that keeps putting repaired vehicles back in the line. Over 10 days of intense fighting, the 4th Armored Division destroys approximately 86 German armored visuals. American losses total around 25 Shermans, the majority recovered and returned to combat within days. A captured German officer, interrogated after the battle, says something that American intelligence records verbatim in the after-action report. "We expected Sherman tanks. We did not expect what happened whenever we destroyed one." He means the replacements. He means Abrams already has fresh vehicles moving forward before the burning ones have cooled. Bastogne, Belgium, December 26, 1944. The machine keeps moving, Germany's last great gamble in the West. The Ardennes offensive, which history will call the Battle of the Bulge, begins on December 16, 1944, with 20 German divisions crashing through American lines in the fog and snow of the Ardennes forest. The 101st Airborne Division, surrounded at the critical crossroads town of Bastogne, holds against 5 German divisions in temperatures that drop below zero. For 8 days, with dwindling ammunition, no air support, and no relief in sight, they hold. On December 26, the relief column arrives. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, the same officer who fought at Arracourt, leads Combat Command B of the 4th Armored Division in a 50-mile drive through German lines. The advance is possible not because American tanks are faster than German tanks, but because American logistics have sustained a 50-mile armored drive through winter conditions that have frozen German supply lines solid. Captured German tank crews during the Bulge are found sitting in immobile Panthers and Tigers with empty fuel tanks. The machines work. The system that feeds them has collapsed. On the afternoon of December 26th, a Sherman named Cobra King, commanded by Lieutenant Charles Bogus, fires 13 rounds to clear the German position at Eastreisen to Bastogne with its fuel gauges reading near empty. The logistical system stretched to its absolute limit, having just barely made the reach. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the German 5th Panzer Army, writes in his war diary for December 26th, "The American relief of Bastogne is a logistical achievement without parallel in this war. They have moved armor, artillery, and supply at a speed and volume we cannot match. It is not their tanks that defeat us here. It is everything that stands behind their tanks. The enemy has named the system. In the language of a general trying to explain his defeat, he has identified exactly what America built after Kasserine and why it could not be stopped. War is not made of divisions and doctrines. It is made of people." Staff Sergeant Lafayette War Daddy Poole was 23 years old, from Alton, Texas, and not a large man by any physical measure. He wore his tank commander's goggles around his neck between engagements like a talisman, and had a habit of humming while his crew loaded shells, a habit his gunner, Private First Class Bert Close, found comforting except when Poole forgot he was doing it and hummed through incoming fire, which Close found unsettling in a way he couldn't quite articulate. Between June and August 1944, Poole's Sherman, named In the Mood after the Glenn Miller tune, is officially credited with destroying 288 enemy armored vehicles, making Poole the highest-scoring American tank ace of the war. But the number alone misrepresents what made him exceptional. Poole was not a marksman in isolation. He was a conductor. He reported enemy positions to artillery before engaging them whenever possible. He coordinated flanking fire with adjacent tank platoons by radio before committing his own vehicle. He understood, in his bones, what McNair's revised doctrine was trying to teach in every training manual. A Sherman fighting alone is a liability. A Sherman with eyes on the enemy, a hand on the radio, and artillery listening. That is a weapons system. On August 20th, 1944, near Pfaffenau, Germany, a round punches through Poole's hull. The explosion takes his right leg belayed the brie. As the medics arrive, Poole gives his crew their next set of targeting coordinates before he allows himself to be moved. He goes home. He survives. His crew keeps fighting. They had learned by his example and by proximity how to use the system. The system does not die when a single commander is carried off the field. That is the point. The second story belongs to Technical Sergeant Charles Donahue, a name absent from popular histories, preserved only in the unit records of the 2nd Armored Division's Maintenance Battalion. Donahue is from Cleveland, Ohio, a machinist's son who had never worked on anything larger than a truck engine before the Army made him responsible for keeping Shermans alive in France. In the month following the Normandy breakout, Donahue's maintenance crew, 8 men, 1 recovery vehicle, and a parts cache improvised from a French farm's machine shed, returns 31 battle-damaged Shermans to combat-ready status, 31 tanks, 8 men, 30 days. Working by flashlight in French barns at 2 in the morning under sporadic artillery fire on machines that arrive bent, burned, and in some cases still warm from their last engagement. German field commanders in Normandy consistently note in their reports that American armored strength seems to replenish overnight, that destroyed tanks are replaced with suspicious speed, A captured Panzer officer, shown the American maintenance operation near Caen in late July 1944, stares at it for a long moment before telling his interrogator, through a translator, that he has never seen anything like it in 5 years of war on 3 fronts. He calls it, with what sounds in the record like genuine admiration, industrial warfare made personal. He means men like Donahue. He means the invisible pillar, the one Germany never built. The third story does not belong to a soldier at all. Rose Monroe worked a 9-hour shift on the aircraft assembly floor at the Willow Run plant in Michigan, 6 days a week, beginning in 1942. She had never held a rivet gun before the war. Her husband had been drafted in 1941. Her mother watched her 2 daughters while she worked. Monroe became, almost by accident, the face of the wartime Rosie the Riveter campaign, though she was one of hundreds of thousands of women doing the same work in plants across the country, each of them holding the 4th pillar steady with their own hands. In a letter to her sister written in the winter of 1943, Monroe says, "I don't know where my parts end up. Could be a plane, could be a tank. Could be it's sitting somewhere in France right now with some boy from Ohio driving it. I hope he knows somebody out here is thinking about him." He almost certainly didn't know her name, but the tank she helped build is what gets him home. The system runs on people like Monroe, on the civilian infrastructure of sacrifice and production that feeds the military machine at the front. It runs in the dark, invisibly, and the front line only notices it when it stops, which, in the European theater, it never does. The Roer River, Germany. February 23, 1945. 06:45. The guns stop. For 3 hours, American artillery has been working the German positions along the eastern bank of the Roer. Now there is a silence so complete that Sergeant Morris Ellison, 2nd Armored Division, can hear his own breathing inside the tank. The silence after artillery is never ord. It is the silence before something worse. Then the order comes. Across a 6-mile front, Sherman tanks begin to move. Not 1, not 10. Hundreds in staggered waves, engines rising to a collective roar that makes the frozen ground tremble. The 29th Infantry Division crosses the Roer on assault boats in the dark, while engineers begin throwing treadway bridges across the current under fire. They have done this in training, in freezing rivers in England, in mudflats in the States, so many times that the procedure outweighs the fear. A German artillery shell detonates 30 meters from the bridge site. The engineers duck for 2 seconds. Then they go back to work. 47 minutes after the engineers begin, the first Sherman crosses. The German defenders, elements of the 9th Panzer Division, veterans fighting in their final defensive line, are not broken men. They are disciplined soldiers in prepared positions, and they fight with the controlled ferocity of men who know what defeat means for the country behind them. Their remaining Panthers and Panzer Jägers engage the first American wave with skill, and the radio traffic from Ellison's battalion turns terse and clipped in the first hour. 3 Shermans burn on the eastern bank. 2 tank commanders are dead. Ellison's own tank takes a round through the front slope. The driver slumps. The tank slows. Ellison drops through the turret basket into the driver's seat, blood on the floor from the wounded man being pulled back, and keeps the tank moving forward. This is not cinematic heroism. This is training becoming reflex at the precise moment when thought is too slow. What breaks the German defense is arithmetic. As the Panthers engage the first Sherman wave, something arrives from the west that the German positions have no answer for. American P-47 Thunderbolts, guided by forward air controllers who have been in radio contact with the armored advance since before dawn, operating on a net that links ground to air in real time, begin working the German defensive positions from above with rockets and 500-pound bombs. They don't bomb blindly. They have coordinates, they have targets, they have identified by the same Sherman crews the Panthers are trying to kill, the 4 pillars, simultaneously, at full pressure. General Otto Hedekamper, Chief of Staff of the German 15th Army, writes in his personal diary on February 25, 1945, "The American method of war is not a method of individual brilliance. It is the method of the machine. When their machine functions correctly, it cannot be stopped. It does not stop for casualties. It does not stop for weather. It does not stop at all. We have no answer to this." By February 28th, American armor is across the Ruhr in strength, pouring through a breach that the German 15th Army cannot close. The last coherent defensive line west of the Rhine is coming apart. The guns fall quiet just before dusk on February 28th. Ellison climbs out of his tank for the first time in 17 hours. His hands are shaking. The air smells of diesel, turned earth, and cordite. And underneath it all something sweeter. The faint, impossible smell of early spring pressing through a winter that has already cost too much. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't celebrate. He stands on the eastern bank of the Ruhr and looks east, toward the Rhine, toward Germany, toward what comes next. And for the first time in a very long time, the end looks close. Somewhere to his left, beyond a stand of leafless trees, a Sherman engine cuts off. Silence settles. In that silence, specific quiet, 6 years of global war is balanced on the edge of something almost over. The history of the Sherman tank is usually told as a tragedy. A story of the weapon outgunned, out-armored, and outclassed by its opponents, and how American tankers died in burning holes because of decisions made in offices far off from the FARF. That story is true. It is also incomplete. The complete story is this: America went to war with the wrong tank and the right system, and when forced to choose between them, it chose the system. The decision was not made in ignorance. American engineers and military planners knew the Sherman compared unfavorably to the Tiger and the Panther. They chose production volume and maintainability over individual superiority because they understood something the Wehrmacht never fully absorbed. Wars of this scale and duration are not won by the best weapon on the field. They are won by the best supported weapon on the field. They are won by the best supported weapon on the field. The weapon that can be replaced when lost. The weapon whose crew can call artillery in under 3 minutes. The weapon whose maintenance crew has it back in action 24 hours after it's hit. The weapon that is the visible tip of an invisible machine built by 6 million workers on a home front 3,000 miles away. The lesson is not limited to 1944. It appears in every sustained competition where the question is not who has the best individual. It's who has the best system around their individuals. The sports franchise that builds superior coaching, development, and culture defeats the franchise that builds superior coaching, development, and culture, defeats the franchise that kelds it gelds. The company that formalizes its failures, that writes the after-action report, distributes the lesson, changes the training, outlasts the company that has more brilliant people but no mechanism for learning faster than it fails. America's greatest weapon in World War II was not the Sherman tank. It was the institutional willingness to stand in front of Kasserine, to stand in front of catastrophic, documented, embarrassing failure, and say, here is what we did wrong, here is why, and here is what changes tomorrow. Remember that fog-covered plateau above Arracourt. Sergeant Critchfield. 15 words on a radio handset, and within 90 seconds an entire system of artillery and armor and air power beginning to move in response. That's what winning looks like. Not a better tank, a better conversation, but here is what the history of the Sherman swarm strategy leaves unanswered. When the war ended and the generals wrote their memoirs and the doctrine boards completed their analyses, the lesson seemed settled. The system beats the weapon. The machine of coordination and logistics and institutional learning defeats the machine of superior armor and firepower. America had proved it. in Tunisia and in France and at Bastogne, at enormous cost, with enormous courage, and with a clarity that should have been impossible to forget. And then, in the years that followed, American military planners began designing a new tank, a heavier tank, a tank with composite armor so thick it could absorb hits that would have vaporized a Sherman. A tank with a gun capable of killing any opponent on Earth at 2 miles. A machine so complex that it requires a dedicated crew of mechanics for every vehicle, and a logistics tale of extraordinary length and sophistication to keep it in the field. They named it the Abrams, after the same Creighton Abrams who won at Arracourt not by outgunning the Panther, but by refusing to fight it alone. The question worth sitting with tonight is this: in building the most capable individual tank in human history, did America remember why the Sherman worked? Or did it make the oldest mistake in the history of warfare, winning a lesson so thoroughly that it forgot it was ever learned? Because the next enemy is already asking the same question, and they have read the same history books we have.